Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode 86 of Retuning Your Firm. And it's Friday, the 24th of February, which for many of us is not a very happy day, given what happened a year ago. But we need to continue to focus on tomorrow as well as on what happened last year. So today we're going to be looking, as you can see in front of you, at smart use of technology. So I'll welcome myself. I'm Richard Chaplin. I'm your co-host for the day with Francesca Lagerberg. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief introduction to the topic today. And just remind you that what we're really talking about today is how can you manage technology? Is it just a fixed cost, a tax, almost somebody could call it? Or is it something that is you kind of do something about as a leader? And as we all know, signing off the annual tech budget is one of the hardest decisions facing any leader. That's no secret. It's a huge expense and there's very little clarity over deliverables. And that decision is even harder now with these massive uplifts that we're seeing in the cost of renewing your core software licenses. And that's partly supply consolidation. As one of our previous presenters or guests has pointed out, there's only about 6 players now left in that legal world in particular, and reductions in general VC funding to tech sector because they're all going into generative AI. And guess what we're going to talk about today? ChatGPT. Surprise, surprise. So we're going to be welcoming shortly David Gilroy of Conscious Solutions and Stephen Brown of Lights On Consulting. And they'll be sharing tips on how best to avoid being stuck with an expensive out-of-date stack, but also really more importantly, how to make sure you maintain an edge in your use of technology. Just quickly before I introduce you to Francesca, who's going to introduce our guests, just on forum news, hundreds of people are watching the videos from past shows every month, which is great. So don't miss out. If you're still thinking about the award submission for the International Management Excellence Awards, they're due on Tuesday, close of play, with a ceremony in June. So please make a submission. Mentorships, as always, please think about becoming a mentor or a mentee, possibly. Some people are both. And I just wanted to show you an interesting article that we got last week in consultancy. You may recall the annual tracker, the quarterly tracker that we run. And this article appeared, as I said, in consultancy.co.uk. So we're really pleased that that was a bit of coverage for all the hard work that you guys have done, because most of those dots on that chart were actually provided by people on the call. So I think I will hand over to Francesca.
Thank you very much, Richard. Lovely to be with you all as we have our regular group of discussions around the hot topics. And this is probably one of the hottest topics at the moment. I'm Francesca Lagerberg. I'm Global CEO of Baker Tilly International. But our first guest probably has one of the more interesting CVs that we've had on these panels for a very long time. He has got a fantastic background in technology and has been working in this field for many years and can bring you great insight about what's happening. And we asked him to share some of the things that we might not find on his LinkedIn profile. And he's got a couple of corkers, but my favorite is in 1986, he was on Blind Date and he actually got picked, which must be one that you can never forget. So David, take us through what we should know about smart technology.
Thanks, Francesca. And the two things people also want to know is her name was Charlotte, and no, we didn't. Okay, so I'm David Gilroy. I'm the Managing Director at Conscious Solutions, and we help law firms in particular become more successful online. So I'm just going to cover 2 topics today. ChatGPT. I mean, you can't walk into a room of techies. I'm not a techie, I'm a business person. So I'm not going to talk about the tech. And then talk a little bit about personalization on websites, because I think there's some interesting tech going on behind that. So ChatGPT, everybody's read about it. Those of you in the legal sector have heard about Allen and Overy's implementation of such tech called Harvey. It's one of their startups they invested in. And at the simplistic level, generative AI, which is just uses large language models, is just a very good predictor of text and what comes next. So I annoyed one of my team last week by generating a perfectly plausible FAQ blog post for our website using ChatGPT. It was a bit dry, it was a bit stale, it all needs to be humanized. And the parallel I'll draw with technology like that is it's an enabler. So I hit a birthday milestone on Sunday. My birthday began with a 6 for the first time. I'm still not as old as Richard. And I did my O-levels back in 1999. and I learned from teachers, I read books, I did practice papers. Fast forward to my MBA in the mid-90s, I was still learning from lecturers, I was still learning from books. A couple of them are holding up my big monitor just here, but we had online databases, CD-ROMs. And this is a parallel in the accounting world, Francesca, I'm sure, and definitely in the legal world. You know, back in the day, it was the white book. First time I met Stephen, we probably met in a meeting room or a library with books racked up that people were still using. And it just meant your learning and your research could be accelerated. And at one level, ChatGPT has gone beyond that. Everybody knows, if you've read about it, it stopped learning in 2021. And the new version that's coming, if Microsoft do invest the $10 billion that's been talked about, will exponentially increase the amount of data that it will learn on. But at the moment, if you go to ChatGPT, give it a web page and say, summarize this page, it won't do that because it only knows what it knows. And the next generation of this is going to be continually learning, but the computing power behind that. So at one level, these tools are nothing new. You know, when a CD-ROM first came out and you could go read and research on that, or when I did my undergrad degree, it was a microfiche, okay? And we had to go and sit in the library and get these little reels of film, and we'd roll them around and look for things. So the internet has just helped with all that. So ChatGPT, is it anything to be scared of? I have 4 copywriters in my business who spend their entire days writing legal content for websites. They're not scared. We have an AI squad coming who are going to start researching ChatGPT in particular and other tools to look at how it will enable us to do better work, faster work, maybe work at less cost. And we'll see how that goes. The second topic I wanted to touch on was personalization on websites. If you've ever landed on a website and it said, welcome back, David, the first time it happens, if your name's not David, it would say something else, obviously. The first time that happens, it is a bit freaky, but the tech behind it with that isn't particularly complicated. If you've ever been to a website and clicked accept cookies, the website at one level knows who you are. In our business, we use some technology called Candy. It's spelled C-A-N-D-D-I. And if I can get you to click on a link in an email newsletter or fill in a form on my website, it will collect your data and store it in a tool. And if you come back to my website next week, I know which pages you've looked at. What does that allow me to do in my BD and marketing? It allows me to target you without saying, hey, Stephen, at 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon, you looked at this page on my website. Don't do that. But it would allow me to contact a business or a firm that's been on the website. I might not know who it is because it will track IP addresses. But if I can get you to click a link from an email newsletter, fill in a form or something, then I can identify you as an individual. So we use that a lot. And then the other side of that is personalizing the experience. You're an accountancy firm and you do personal tax and you do business tax advice and consultancy. When I've been to your website and I spend all my time looking at personal tax, when I come back, morph that page to show me more of that information and less of the business stuff that maybe I'm not interested in as an individual. Okay, so looking at behavior, seeing what people have used, and then adapting the content on your website using these different personalization engines. The one that we're looking at is called Personise, Person YZE, starts from a couple of $100 a month. It doesn't have to be that expensive. And Francesca, that's me done.
Excellent, David. Thank you very much. I'm going to have lots of questions for you later. Though Rich and I will be, when we get to the panel, there'll be many things we'll want to talk about. But let's hear from Stephen. So, Stephen's got a lot to talk about here around people, process, technology. So a lovely build on what we've just been hearing. And Stephen was also trying to find something that wasn't on LinkedIn that would be as exciting as being on Blind Date, and did pretty well actually. UK gymnastics. He's one of the floor team in the UK gymnastics team, which I think is pretty awesome actually. So Stephen, take us away with your take on smart tech.
Thank you, Francesca, and thanks for the opportunity just to have a chat. So Stephen Brown, Lightstone Consulting. I work with senior leadership teams in professional service firms to help them get confidence in signing off the IT budget. And I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle, pragmatic advice for senior leaders. But the simple truth of the matter is technology doesn't give you an advantage. Technology is just an enabler, building on something that David said. It's the combination of 3 areas: people, process, and technology. Now, you might find that slightly odd coming from somebody that is an IT professional, but how can I say that? Well, with the adoption of cloud, the simple truth is, whether you are a sole practitioner or you are the largest professional service firm in the world, you all have access to the same level of technology. Simple illustration, just to make that point, if I take something like Office 365, £30 a month, you get access to probably over 100 different applications. Most firms will use 3 or 4 of those, which takes you on to another point of, how am I getting value out of my budget? Well, what are those other 97 applications? I think some of the other areas like artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, Microsoft launches 1,500 different applications a year. Gartner referred to all of that as sort of the hyper cycle. So it takes about 2 to 10 years for some of this very emerging tech to actually become a product. So ChatGPT sounds really interesting, but it'll probably take anywhere between 2 and 10 years before that's productized and firms can actually consume it without having to build technology. And that's quite a fundamental aspect for any professional service firm. Do you want to be buying technology and delivering a competitive advantage, or do you want to try and build it? And if you're going to build it, you are essentially becoming a software firm as well. But what can be done to deliver a bit of an edge with your technology? Well, there's 3 areas that you have to focus on. It's cyclic, and some of the most richest organizations in the world go around this cycle in hours. They don't measure in days, months, or years. They're measuring in hours. So what are those 3 items that we have to do very well? Well, it's measure, analyze, and then change. So let me just put a bit of meat on the bones. To measure something, you have to have data. Well, professional services firms do have a huge amount of wealth of data. Might not be very exciting data, but you certainly have a lot of data and you can extract that out of your systems. If you haven't got that, you're starting from a point of guessing. That's never great when you're signing off large budgets. Once you've got your data, you need to do some analysis of that, and there's lots of tools and ways to go around that. If you want some interesting reads, look at something like survivor bias around data analysis, etc. And then the part that becomes absolutely fundamental to all of this is change. There is no point getting the data, analyzing it, but then having a culture where where you are accepting of zero change in an organization. And I see this time and time again. Firms spend many thousands on technology, but they don't deliver the training and they don't enforce change in an organization. So broadly, people are still working the same way that they were working 10 years ago, yet the technology has moved on. So what happens when it kind of goes wrong? Well, sadly, there's many times I walk into firms, they've spent a lot on some technology because somebody in a room thought, this is going to be fantastic. This is game-changing technology. I think this will work for our firm. So the salesman does a bit of a great number. They convince them that they need this for the whole firm. So let's go firm-wide. Let's put a 3-year term on this. And then we roll it out. It's cloud-based, so it's available next week. We send an email to the whole firm saying, from tomorrow, we're going to use this technology. And what happens is it falls flat on its face because they haven't understood where their starting position is. So the data, they haven't analysed it to understand what needs to happen. And then they haven't followed that through and sort of thought about the culture and change aspect of the firm. It's a large topic. 5 minutes isn't a long time, but I'm out of time now. So Francesca, I'll hand back to you.
Fabulous, Stephen. Thank you so much for that. And I think there's quite a lot of us listening to that going, oh, seen some of those things in action that you just referred to there around measure, analyze and change. Let's move to some questions, because this is such a broad topic, but it's a very, very big issue at the moment. Let's start with a little bit of ChatGPT because it is the topic of the day. You've got a couple of professional services firms that are dabbling in this area. You mentioned Allen and Overy. And you've had big accounting firms like KPMG warning its staff about how to use it, saying don't put confidential information on there, just in case that gets extrapolated and shared in a much broader way, breaching confidentiality rules. And many other people going, well, how do I use this? David, what's your sort of take on that? Are people fearing things they don't need to fear? Are they getting nervous about stuff they don't understand? Or actually, is that just a really sane approach to use these things with that kind of caution?
I think professional services are always going to take a cautious approach. We know that. Okay. You know, is ChatGPT storing every query we give it, you know, to improve its language and learning? Almost certainly. You know, I have to say, I've not read the T's and C's to see that. But would I take some clients' personal data about their divorce, stick all those details into a service like that and say, write me a better divorce document? Not at this stage, not without knowing where that document's going. I mean, crikey, we can't even get clients to export anonymous data from their practice management system to allow us to load it into Google Analytics to give them better reporting on their return on investment. So the thought of somebody just going and doing that with client data. And as somebody I'm now, my second book is going to be called Perfect Memory Shit Recall. There was a story just this week around a firm who was saying, just don't use it at all. Well, that's ridiculous. You know, everybody's going to sign up and try it and have a little play. And others saying, use it in a cautious way. And if you look at the announcement A&O made with Harvey, it's like, it will assist our lawyers, but everybody needs to be very careful about what's generated, and a lawyer will always review it. And that's true of any kind of content. The document I generated, even though I said use UK spelling, organized still came out with a Z. Okay, so it might be big and it might be clever, but it is still a bit stupid. And there's lots of stories of what they did with Bing, it just being factually incorrect. One story I saw, a journalist asked it to summarize the financial accounts of Gap Inc. in the US, and it just made numbers up that were completely wrong. You know, got their EBITDA figure wrong, and just a whole load of stuff. Earnings per share, completely made up, nothing that was in the document. So you pays your money, you takes your choice.
No, that's so that yes, I think there's a lot of learning to be done before anyone will feel comfortable about using it just as is. But that's some good advice around client data, which just feels fraught with difficulty.
Although I did get a very nice birthday card with a poem inside it written by ChatGPT.
You know, it cares, deep down. And Stephen, maybe we could just pick up on that piece around how you actually do the change element, because I totally agree with you in terms of tech being a great enabler at the moment, but not necessarily more than that. But I've seen that happen so many times. Huge investment in technology, very little change that's been driven off it. So you do the same old stuff, you just use a different tech platform where you use maybe 10% of it. How are you getting people to shift to actually invest in the change? Because I'm guessing that investing in the change is probably more expensive than investing in the tech.
100%. So whenever we look at a budget for a large project, you pretty much need to take your software cost, times that by 2, and go, that's probably going to be the change cost. Then there's lots of things that you can do around that. For me, absolutely, you have to understand your starting point. Because if you don't understand your starting point, you never know what your end point is going to look like, where it is, and actually what success looks like. So there's many firms that make huge investment in tech and go, it wasn't a success. And then actually when you do all the measurements, you go, well, you have had these successes, and they didn't understand that. They didn't see the benefit of it. Therefore, they've not celebrated it. Therefore, everybody doesn't get that good feeling of we've made a success, we've made a change. So that's super important. There's lots of other things around the sort of psychology of change and how you do it. But one of the very obvious things, there's 2 types of change. There's sort of an enforced change, which we probably all know and understand. We've all gone through that over the last 3 years. We all had to work from home. Wow, you know, that would have probably taken 10 or 15 years if we were going to do it through an unenforced change. So sometimes creating that environment where we're more accepting of change and actually enforcing it and creating a one-way door can drive change much quicker. So take the old way away. And the analogy that is used many times in many books is, how do you take a block of frozen raspberries to a block of frozen strawberries? Well, you have to melt the old block, then take the raspberries out, put the strawberries in, and the bit then that we always forget is you need to then refreeze. So it's about actually refreezing back in the firm. This is the new way of doing things now, and getting rid of the old way.
Oh, I like that analogy. Richard, what questions have you got?
Well, I really wanted to thank David for his thoughts on GPT. I mean, I was just trying to sort of explore the whole issue of learning, because it seemed to me you said that learning can accelerate with ChatGPT. I'm not actually convinced that's true. I think that what it's doing, it is accelerating the process of creation. Couple that with social media broadcasting, but it doesn't really answer the question of why do people learn, which I think is a more important one. So how would you, when you work with your clients, how would you help them actually absorb and this knowledge to be transferred to them rather than just being sprayed at them through some gun?
That's a good question. And I think if I use the phrase, it allows you to learn faster, maybe it speeds up the process a little bit. I mean, we're humans. There's a limit, I'm assuming, to what we can learn, even with some of the sci-fi films you see. Lucy is one that springs to mind. So I think it's a version of what Stephen said about change, which is to start embedding some of these things as a habit. I know an agency overseas, they're actually using GPT-3, not ChatGPT version, to generate content for their clients. And their clients know this, and it just accelerates that process. But they're giving it steps of information. At the end of it, it's still humanized. A person still looks at it, and they run it through a plagiarism checker, as you would always do. So I think with the approach with clients is, and we work with over 350 law firms around the UK and internationally, is we know the people are at the bleeding edge of things, and we know who we can go to with the good stuff. If we look at Moore's law and the change curve, some people will try everything, they'll be early adopters, and then bin it very quickly when they realize it doesn't really change very much. So I think for us, it's understanding which clients have an appetite to try new things and then try it and fail fast. I think that's Google's phrase.
Brilliant. And Stephen, just sort of staying with that thought around the Moore's law and how you were early adopters. I mean, I imagine when you're working with boards, some of them will be, I would use the word conservative, the word laggard does come to mind sometimes, and others are going to be much more switched on. I mean, how do you help them cross that chasm?
Fortunately, the insurance company and the regulators are helping drive that now much better than probably any IT professional has ever done. So the insurers now, if you want cyber insurance, are saying you have to keep your software up to date, you have to keep your hardware up to date, within 2 years, within 3 years, in some instances, within 14 days, you have to be updating. So if you're a professional service firm and you have lots of really important data and you want cyber insurance, you have no choice. You have to upgrade. And sadly, for a lot of firms that have sweat their assets, which is a great phrase, they're now being stung with huge bills, or they have to sit there with no insurance, which is a rock and hard place. So that is certainly assisting and making some of those conversations much easier.
Fantastic. Maybe Francesca, you have a couple of questions, and then probably we're coming to the end of the session.
Well, I think I've got a question for both of you. I mean, given the fact that if you sneeze in tech, it can cost £1 million. There's a lot of expense that goes into various investments. And I think there's a massive concern in the professional services sector about where do we even invest? Is it going to be out of date in 6 months' time, a year's time? What's your sort of thoughts on that in terms of how people can get themselves comfortable with the fact that the tech they're using today or might want to use today could be semi-obsolete in a relatively short period of time?
Get over it. Yeah. We're the three of us, Stephen maybe not, are old enough to remember installing Microsoft Office 20 years ago on a stack of 18 disks that would take forever. And I'm sitting at home on a 600 meg download, bringing down a massive file in seconds. I think it's just adapting to that change. ChatGPT in Microsoft Word how quickly this year, I'd have a £10 bet with somebody. It's going to start popping up. They can put it into Bing that quickly. They can put it into Office pretty quickly as well. I think you just have to accept nowadays. I didn't like it when I go back 15 years when I can't remember what software we were using, went from CapEx spend and maintenance to per user per month. My TCO over 5 years more than doubled. Well, why is that a value to me? It's a value to the software company. It might change their lumpy cash flow model, but the product got very good very quickly. I think it was QuickBooks, actually, Francesca. And now it's in the cloud and we don't bat an eyelid. As long as we can get online, which we can do with this size device pretty much from anywhere, good enough to use stuff. We just got to accept that what we're using today is gone in 5 years' time.
Stephen, you're in a similar place?
I had that conversation with the board only 2 weeks ago. They were complaining that Microsoft are going up 20%. Other vendors, I have to be careful now. I can talk about Microsoft, not others. Going up 20%, 30%. One of them even went up 70% on their license cost year on year. And they said, "What are we going to do about this?" And I said, "Pay it, and then get better use out of it, and become more efficient." You have two choices as a firm: either pay the larger fees and use the technology and don't change and erode your margin, or pay the technology bill and change and become more efficient, more productive, have better training and become more efficient and maintain your margin. The choice is up to the firm, but the bill is going up no matter what, because you can't run your business without technology. And Bill and wherever he is on his yacht will need to upgrade soon. So undoubtedly there'll be another 10 or 20% uplift in our Microsoft licenses at some point.
Although I'll give a contrary view to that. As a business with our roots firmly in the open source software world, one of the first things we did in lockdown 1, March 23rd, 4th, 2020, was we binned off Dropbox because it was costing us $6,000 a year, and spun up a version of a product called Nextcloud and have never looked back. So for the last 3 years, we've spent nothing on large scale gigabytes of document storage, but we're a techie business. So we have the techies in the business who can do that. But it saved us, and I'm going to say this publicly, we bought a server on eBay, Stephen, for 500 quid.
So there's definitely something there about shopping around being smart, but also about if you're going to pay the money, make sure you're using it, which I think is a lesson for all of us. Back to you, Richard.
Fantastic. Well, we've just got into the last minute, as they say now, so I think it's probably a chance to wrap up. So if I may show the gallery so we can all see everybody. Great. I thought, David, your idea that we should remember this is not a new tool is really important, and that another new tool will come along soon. Whether everyone's going to set up an AI squad, I'm not sure. But the main thing is that just be aware that the more you can adapt your content, and particularly your website, to your client, the more that will resonate with them. And then with Stephen, I like the bit at the end where you said, pay it and use it. You've really got to actually make use of what you do. Confidence is important in signing off the budget, but at the end of the day, change is what matters if you really want to go through that process of measure, analyze, and change. So, and if all that doesn't work, then the bad guys will come along, otherwise known as your insurance brokers, and tell you you've got no choice in the matter. So on which happy note, I would like to thank our panel today. I'd like to thank David and Stephen, thank Francesca for her and fascinating questions. We're back in a couple of weeks, then we take a break for Easter, so there'll be a couple of weeks after that before we then come back. But today I thought was really interesting. I'm really looking forward to hearing views from everybody as to whether they are all in the same boat and respect the reality as we all are. On which happy note, bye for now.